Yes, you are in the right place. This is Banfield, and we are live from New York City. And you're probably thinking, who the hell is she? But we've met before, trust me. I'm Sarah Azari, criminal defense attorney, and the very opinionated legal analyst on this network. So a couple weeks ago, the producer extraordinaire of this show invited me and asked me if I'd like to sit in for Ashleigh tonight. And I'm like, duh, girl. I booked that flight so quick to be with all of you tonight on this side of the desk this time. And you know, I just love and live for unpacking crime, especially in prime time. And boy, do we have a show for you tonight. We'll start with a controversial case out of my home state of California. A young woman convicted of involuntary manslaughter after stabbing a friend 108 times. She also stabbed her own dog and then herself. Her punishment? Probation. No prison time. And her explanation? Weed-induced psychosis. I promise you it's a real thing. Bryn Spacer will join me live in just a moment. Then, Ashleigh's been calling this the summer of Scott, and it's heating up big time for two reasons. We're about to hit a 20-year mark. I can't believe it's been 20 years since the California jury found Scott Peterson guilty of murdering his wife Lacey and their unborn baby. A powerful legal force in the city where I practice, Los Angeles, is trying to get Scott Peterson a new murder trial based on what they say is new evidence. But hold on, because two brand new streaming documentaries might make you rethink your take on the Peterson case. Ashleigh spoke to the director of one of them. It's huge on Netflix right now, and their fascinating conversation is coming up. Plus, new developments in the Matthew Perry death investigation. The actor's personal assistant has told authorities that the fatal injection was Perry's idea. Does that even really matter? 5 people, including that assistant, have been indicted in the case so far. Will this new information have any effect whatsoever on whether and how they are prosecuted? We'll discuss it tonight. But first, a grisly killing, a guilty verdict, and 2 years probation for the killer, all because of cannabis-induced psychosis, a real diagnosis confirmed by experts on both sides of this case. In May of 2018, Bryn Spacer took a hit off her friend's bong before stabbing him 108 times, and then stabbing her dog, and eventually stabbing herself. The potency of the weed and the manner it was consumed, especially for someone who was not an experienced pot smoker, experts say, triggered the psychosis that led Bryn to have visions and to hear voices. Visions that she was dead with paramedics, family standing over her, and voices that told her the only way to bring herself to life was to kill Chad O'Melia and then stab herself. Bryn says she never knew what she was doing. When cops arrived in the early morning, it took 4 shocks from a taser, 9 baton blows, breaking her arm to wrestle that knife out of Bryn's hand. All of it caught on body cam. Prosecutors dropped the original charge from murder to involuntary manslaughter, a crime that's punishable by 4 years in prison under California law. Now, just for context, you guys, you can get more time than that for identity theft. So just imagine the shock in the courtroom when she wasn't even given any prison time at all. What a stellar result. What great lawyers, of course, they're my friends. Bryn received 2 years probation and 100 hours of community service. Chad O'Melia's father has appeared on this show several times to express his feelings. Often, of course, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration throughout that trial. But tonight, Bryn Spacer joins live, along with her attorneys and my esteemed colleagues from Los Angeles, Bob Schwartz and Michael Goldstein. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Bryn, thank you for being here. I know this is very difficult for you each and every time you have to talk about this. I want to start with you first. When did you realize how bad the consequences of this psychosis were? In other words, you had killed your friend. When did you realize that?
Before I answer that question, I just want to make a statement.
Sure.
that every day I do think about Chad and his family and his friends, and I am so sorry for their unthinkable loss and the immense pain they will endure forever. I didn't find out that he passed until days later when I woke up from the hospital. And when I did wake up from the hospital, that's when I knew that there was something bad happened, but I wasn't given answers right away. And I was very scared, confused, and shocked, and I didn't know what was going on. And throughout the days in the hospital, I was starting to figure out more and more what was happening, and later found out about Chad.
I mean, I can't even begin to fathom the trauma around all of this, the trauma that you're living with that, frankly, I don't think will ever really fully go away. And I think it's none of us can really fathom this. So, you know, are you in therapy? Is there there's got to be PTSD associated with this. How are you coping? What are you doing?
I immediately started seeing a therapist in California within 6 months of the incident. It took a while to find the right one, but she specialized in PTSD, and I saw her for years. And then when I went to Illinois, I saw another therapist. So I was seeing 2 therapists over the years. And then with the immense support from my family and friends and having the right resources, and my faith in God helped me get through this horrible, horrible thing that has happened to both families.
And so you have a support system in place that you can basically rely on. As you know, I know I've never experienced anything, of course, like this, but I've had PTSD from certain events in my life, and you never know when it creeps up on you, you know. And I'm glad to hear that you have the support system that you can rely on as you need it. Now, I understand you're working with an organization called Every Brain Matters. Can you tell our viewers what that is and what you're doing with that organization?
Yeah, it's a nonprofit organization that is working to fulfill my court-ordered public education hours. And they are educating the public about cannabis-induced psychosis and the potential harms from it, including that it could lead to violence. And so that's how I'll be getting my community service hours with them.
And, you know, if you could say something to Chad right now, I know you addressed the family. If you could talk to Chad and say something to him, what would you say to him?
I am so sorry that he had to go through that. 'Cause there's no way I would have ever hurt him. And I'm just so sorry that he went through that pain.
Yeah, it's
I don't know.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Bob, let me go to you. You know, the law gives us a drop-down menu when it comes to homicides, right? And Bryn was initially charged with murder. Murder? Please make it make sense. I don't understand. And then eventually this became manslaughter. Tell us what happened and how, you know, did body cam have anything to do with this? How did this come about?
The body cam, you're talking about the video from the body cam of the deputies that arrived on the scene. That had a lot to do with it, but it wasn't the only thing. Well, first of all, this was a murder case for several years. And what changed is that after we had retained several experts who all came to the same conclusion that what happened here was a cannabis-induced psychosis that triggered the violence, and also that Bryn had no conscious or cognitive awareness of what she was doing. That's what we had presented to the prosecution. The prosecution then elected to retain their own expert, somebody who has testified frequently for the prosecution, not only for the prosecution, but frequently. And we had objected to this expert interviewing our client. Our position was we weren't claiming that Bryn had a mental illness or disorder or mental impairment, quite the opposite, that she was normal. Over objection, the judge ordered Bryn to be interviewed by the psychologist who was retained by the prosecution. And he spent a whole day with Bryn, interviewing her, conducting psychological tests. And in his conclusions were exactly the same as our experts. That this
so you
was
had, that's interesting. That's interesting because typically in these cases we have a battle of experts, and it seems like you guys had an accord between the experts, which essentially, but I still think murder, I still think it was overcharged. But I want to go to you, Mike. The decision to put your client on the stand, it's always a tough decision for all of us. It's a fluid decision. We never know when we need to do it. What was it in this case that made it easy for you to know that, Bryn needs to testify?
Well, number one, Bryn is a remarkable human being, and she's highly educated, and nobody knew her case more than her with regard to the way she was feeling and what she had to do to get her message across to the jurors in that courtroom. It's always a tough decision to put your client on the stand, and we very, very rarely do that in our line of work. But here there was no choice because of the defense that we were mounting. And what we, just to give you a bit of insight into the defense that we were presenting was we were trying to convince the jury that it was involuntary intoxication, that she didn't intend to smoke whatever it was in that bong. She did take the first hit. There was some questions about the second hit, but she certainly didn't know that the contents of that bong were high potency substances that caused the psychosis that was caused. And you could compare this to being roofied in a bar where, of course, you have a drink at a bar, but somebody places something in that drink. It was similar here because what she thought she was getting was the same type of pot that she had tried three or four times in the past.
Right, but Mike, the jury obviously disagreed with you. You said the jury got it wrong, the judge got it right, and you're appealing. But the jury disagreed with you because the jury didn't believe it was involuntary intoxication. They did believe it was involuntary manslaughter. But what is the issue on appeal?
Well, I'll let Bob address the appellate issue, but you're absolutely right, Sarah, that the jury didn't buy into our defense, so to speak. But Judge Worley, of course, as courageous as he was, he righted that wrong, and he did what he could in terms of sentencing. Right. He sentenced her to probation, no time, and in a jurisdiction like Ventura, that was a very courageous decision by Judge Worley.
No, and it was. Let me just toot your horns. You guys are great lawyers. I think Bryn is lucky to be alive, and also very lucky and fortunate that she had you two. I want to just get to.
And by the way,
Bryn.
sorry, just could jump in on that point. When you say she's lucky to be alive, let me expand on that. The reason that Bryn is lucky to be alive is that when the deputies came in, as you alluded to, she was stabbing herself. And they told her to drop the knife. She kept stabbing herself. They tased her, as you mentioned, 4 times. She kept stabbing herself. One of the deputies struck her with a steel-tipped baton 9 times before finally dislodging the knife from her hand. Only because of the intervention of that deputy is Bryn still alive.
Yeah, and Bryn, I want to give the last word to...
Keep in mind, Sarah, Sarah, the district attorney's office had all of this body-worn video available to them from the very early stages of the case. They had a series of notes that were taken by her when she was intubated in the hospital as she woke up the next morning after several surgeries. So they had the body-worn video. They had the marijuana that was recovered at the house. They had her notes about how she was feeling and the fact that she didn't want to take that second hit. And all of these things could have been reviewed during a pre-filing review of the case. but the district attorney's office decided to file a murder, and ultimately down the line, years down the line, they made that decision to dismiss the murder once our experts reached their decisions.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why I've had 5 cases in my career in Ventura County. I want to end with you, Bryn. What is the takeaway for our viewers? What is the one thing you can share that, is the message from this horrific nightmare, really, that you went through?
I don't think marijuana should be promoted as safe to use. And there definitely needs to be some more education that psychosis can happen and that cannabis needs to be regulated. Really? Okay. I know there are a lot of people that disagree with you, but I agree with you. I know.
But, all right. Well,
Sir, if I could just briefly jump in on that point. What we learned in this case is the danger of high potency marijuana. Like most people, when we first came in the case, I think we had a misconception about generally what effect marijuana has. But then the more we studied, we learned the unregulated nature of the marijuana dispensary industry, especially here in California, and the high potency products that are being sold. And that Chad, we know, according to the evidence, was purchasing high potency marijuana. But the cautionary tale about this case, I think for your viewers out there, is that high potency marijuana is very dangerous. And there is a link between high potency marijuana and psychosis, and a link between high potency marijuana and violence.
Yeah, so we're going to actually have your expert on to elaborate on all of this in the next block. But Bryn, what do you want to tell Chad's family?
I just hope that they can find some compassion and forgiveness in the situation and look at how the cannabis industry can be dangerous for people, regular users or novice users. And we just need to all be more educated about it and spread more awareness about the possible dangers.
Bryn Spacer, thank you for joining me, and I wish you the best of luck moving forward, especially with your license. And Bob Schwartz, Michael Goldstein, see you in a Los Angeles courtroom soon. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Still to come. What was it in the marijuana Bryn smoked that caused her to go into psychosis? And what exactly is psychosis? Is this some excuse? One of the experts who testified in her defense breaks down the science and why he believes the killing wasn't Bryn's fault. He's live with me next. Recreational marijuana is legal in 24 states right now. You'll find it in gummies, flavored vapes, oils. You can also just get a big whiff off of it, on most city streets. No, thank you. I'm not a pot girl. But make no mistake, today's weed is not your grandma's weed. Some cannabis products have up to 90% THC, and that can seriously interfere with mental health, unbeknownst to the user, too. In rare cases, it can even bring users to the point of psychotic breakdown, a lot like being roofied, for example. And that's what a team of experts testified to in the manslaughter trial of Bryn Spacer. Dr. Daniel Buffington was a defense witness. He's a clinical pharmacologist and president of Clinical Pharmacology Services and associate professor at the University of South Florida Colleges of Pharmacy and Medicine. That was a lot on a Friday night. He joins me now live. Dan, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sarah.
So listen, I'm just going to be real with you. When I talk about this case to friends, to lawyers, and I go, cannabis psychosis, they go, oh, come on. That's just BS. Your reaction?
Right. Well, I think that we all have years worth of understanding of what we think societally marijuana is. And actually, if you go back 20, 30, 40 years, it was a very different product in terms of intensity and the amount of THC, the active ingredient, that was actually in what an individual would smoke. So the experience is far different today than it was years ago. And there's a wide variety, as you mentioned, of ways to take it.
Well, I want to get to that. The ingestion of marijuana, you can smoke it with a bong, you can smoke it in a joint, you can take gummies, you can vape, whatever. Tell us about sort of the how does the way that Bryn, I'm not even sure exactly what that is, the way that she ingested the marijuana or smoked the marijuana, how did that potentially impact this psychosis that she experienced?
Sure. So one of the things that we understand is there's different products you can purchase, different ways you can get cannabis, which is a variety of plants in the same family, that turn into marijuana, which is what's actually smoked or ingested or eaten. So there's edibles, there's topical products. In smoking and in using a bong where you're just inhaling a large quantity of THC-filled smoke at one time, the lungs are an amazingly rapid form for administering medications, for absorbing them instantly into the bloodstream.
So is that, what is the method called that was it stacking or milking or something?
So she just thought she was inhaling from a bong. So I have one here. So a bong is just a device that is filled with water. A person puts marijuana into the bowl or chamber or bowl, burns it with a lighter or match, and then inhales through the top and brings into this upper chamber smoke. So if you just light or rip and bring that in, then you're just inhaling that one quantity. So think of it in terms of like a medication. You took a dose. The first administration that was given to her appeared clear and just a little smoke in that top chamber. After that dose, Chad had asked her for what she can recall from that night. Do you feel it? Are you high? And at that juncture, he said, well, let me give you something. This is going to be different. This will be more intense. When he turned around with the second time with that bong to give it to her, she described that as solid or white or opaque. That's indicative of something that's called milking or stacking. So someone who knows how to prepare that is bringing 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe multiple doses into the chamber, that when the person inhales that smoke, they're not getting one dose, they're getting many doses. So if you think of it like medications, many at one time.
Does this and this effect of psychosis, does this at all turn on somebody's underlying, maybe known or unknown medical conditions, or could this happen to anyone, even if they're completely normal, for lack of a better way to put it?
No, it's a great question. What we know now is that individuals, there's some risk factors for bad experiences, for someone who's not just going to take it and feel relaxed or some type of euphoria. If you take lower potency, lower concentrations of THC, then most people experience that euphoria, relaxation. Maybe they feel silly or more social. And there's two receptors in the brain, CB1 and CB2. At the lower concentrations, that's what you get is the relaxation, maybe even an anti-anxiety. As potency, the amount of THC in that. And plants today are now, like you mentioned in the earlier part, is that they're upwards of 80, 90%. Years ago, they were 5 to 15%, and even upwards then of 30 and 40%. We saw that what Chad was purchasing was in the high 30s. And at that juncture, to give that to a naive individual or to someone who has an underlying, she was not determined to have any underlying mental health issues, no anxiety, no paranoia, no depression. So what we know now is high concentration, very potent product, given to an individual who's naive and given in a manner that rapidly gets into the lungs and then to the brains, causes an exaggerated response. We have chemicals in our brains called neurotransmitters, and dopamine, glutamate are two of those key chemicals. We get an intense rush when that happens, and that explains why emergency rooms all across the country have that higher potencies.
Look, I'm a terrible example. I take a hit of weed and I'm horizontal for a week. It's just, I do stupid things. But what is psychosis? And we've got to wrap. We've got about 30 seconds. But what is psychosis? And what are the statistics? Because I'm telling you, people are still going like, what? Is this really a thing? Or people are going to now hit the bong, kill people, hurt people, and go, oh, well, it was psychosis.
Well, psychosis, it would be the extreme. So people are showing up in the emergency room with extreme anxiety, paranoia, and also psychosis. So in that case, it's a complete loss of touch with reality. So it's a person who may be standing, talking, moving. They are not in the same room with you in terms of understanding where they're at or what their actions are. They may be hearing hallucinations or audible commands. It's a very dangerous situation, and it's happening now in emergency rooms across the country of all ages, but it's because there is, of what's out there, some is regulated, and then there's also a high degree of agricultural engineering that's creating products that, so if you converted it to alcohol, it'd be a beer at 5%, liquor at 30, 40, 50%, and grain alcohol, which could be 95%. It's still alcohol. In this case, it's still cannabis or marijuana or THC. It's just extremely larger amount being ingested at one time.
Understood. Dan, I definitely will keep your number. I might need an expert like you in my next case. Dan Buffington, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Coming up next, you think you know a story that's been part of your life for 20 years, then bam, new information, new voices, and a new perspective that make you rethink everything. Scott Peterson has been in prison since 2004, convicted of murdering his wife Lacey and their unborn baby. Now, 2 brand new documentaries are re-examining the murders, Scott Peterson's trial, and the people who still think he didn't do it. Hold on to your opinion, because Ashleigh spoke to the director of one of those fascinating programs, and you'll see their conversation next. Fire up Netflix right now. Actually, scratch that. They're going to boot me out. Wait till after this show, okay? Don't change the channel. And you'll see the #2 program on the entire platform, a new docuseries re-exploring the horrific murder of Lacey Peterson. Can you believe it's been almost 20 years since a jury found Lacey's husband, Scott Peterson, guilty of murdering not only her, but the unborn baby boy they planned to name Connor? Dang, I feel old. I can't believe it's been 20 years. It was an unspeakable crime that Scott Peterson denies to this day. And though a powerful band of lawyers is trying to win him a new trial, he's sitting in prison tonight serving life with 0 chance of parole. This summer, 2 major streaming platforms are rolling out competing documentaries with never-before-seen material and rarely heard voices. One of them dropped this week on Netflix. Take a look.
This was not somebody who was waiting for his wife to come back.
Contacted by telephone, Scott Peterson said, quote, "I hope their efforts help find my wife and kid." Her father told NBC News, quote, "I'm glad they are looking in the right direction. I know he did it."
At this point in the investigation, we think we know what's going on, but we can't prove it yet. He's predicting his wife is missing 2 weeks before she's missing. Maybe he made 5 anchors and we can only find 1. Her hair is wrapped up in a pair of needle-nose pliers in his boat that nobody knows about. We are feeling we have enough. Let's take him down. But we couldn't find a body.
We had a list of circumstantial evidence pointing at Scott, but the DA in Stanislaus County, he told us privately, he said, bring me a body or you don't have a filing.
That 3-part series is called American Murder, Lacey Peterson. And this week, Ashleigh got the chance to speak to the series director, Skye Borgman.
Skye, did you set out to do a documentary that would compete with the voice of Scott Peterson that's very prominent and coming out right around this anniversary, or was this sort of a coincidence?
It really was a bit of a coincidence. When I first started on this project, there were rumblings of this other documentary, and I knew that it was happening. I didn't know exactly what their story was. I didn't know exactly what my story was, to be completely honest. And I really started researching, and I knew that there had been appeals, and I knew that Scott Peterson obviously had been in the news recently, but I didn't really, I remember moments of the case, but I didn't remember all of the details. And so as I started really researching into the details, that's when I really knew what the story became. And it really has been recently when the Peacock documentary came out and it coincided with the release of this one. I think we honestly both just finished at the same time.
Well, it's actually really remarkable because together they make this competing case almost like a trial, in documentary form. I'm curious about what you discovered, because we all feel like we've lived this case. Some of us have been doing it, since the early part of the 2000s. What did you find out that you hadn't heard before? What'd you see?
It's hard for me to really pinpoint what it was that I hadn't heard before or what I had forgotten. But what was so remarkable to me, or what I'd forgotten, I guess, was just the role that Amber Frey played in this entire thing and how she was recording secretly all of these conversations with Scott. I didn't know at the time that was happening, and nobody really knew that was happening except for Amber and the Modesto Police Department until the trial happened and when they played those tapes in the trial. So that to me was incredibly interesting. Listening, I think we got something like 8 hours of tapes that we listened to. Only a fraction of that really appears in the documentary. But that she came forward so quickly as soon as she figured out that Scott Peterson, the man that she was dating that she didn't know was married, and his wife was missing. The night she found out, she called the police and pretty much the next day started recording conversations.
One other thing in the doc that I wanted to ask you about was Sharon Rocha, the mother of Laci Peterson. Oftentimes the victim gets forgotten, especially when there were all these appeals. And Scott Peterson's been in the news a lot for the LA Innocence Project. But Sharon is still in mourning decades later. And I think she said something to you I hadn't heard before, that she had a bad feeling about Scott from the get-go. I never knew that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I had always thought, because of the media and how it was presented, and because of what she had said before as well, that it was really when she learned about Amber Frey that they publicly turned against Scott. But when we sat down and I was able to talk to her, she said that she'd had a gut feeling kind of from the very beginning. And what was really interesting to me was why she didn't talk to Laci about it, or why even after Laci went missing that she didn't question Scott more. And it came down to if Laci, or when Laci came home at that moment in time, and she had to explain to Laci that she had questioned Laci's husband, Scott. Like, how was she going to have that conversation with her daughter? I think she regrets it now, but ultimately it really is interesting how she really comes back to, Sharon Rocha comes back to trust your gut. And I think it's something we can all kind of remember.
Well, it's great viewing. It's called American Murder, Laci Peterson, streaming on Netflix now. Skye Borgman, good to have you back on the show. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much.
And of course, Ashleigh and the producers here are keeping a very close eye on the LA Innocence Project as they work to get a new murder trial for Scott Peterson 20 years post-conviction. It'll definitely be interesting to see how that develops. Still to come, shoot me up with a big one. According to Matthew Perry's assistant, that's what the actor said right before he received a third and final ketamine injection before he died. Does that help the 5 people charged in connection to his death? I'll discuss it with Jesse Weber, my friend, next.
Movements. Report fevers, stiff muscles, or problems thinking, as these may be life-threatening. Sleepiness is the most common side effect.
Take control by asking your doctor about Ingrezza.
When the feds announced charges against 5 people in the death last fall of Matthew Perry, we learned a lot more than just names and alleged offenses. We learned, for instance, that on the day that Perry died, the actor's personal assistant admits giving him 3 separate injections of ketamine, a hospital-grade anesthetic. The last dose came after Perry allegedly told Kenneth Iwamasa to, quote, shoot me with the big one. Perry was found dead in his hot tub a short time later of a ketamine overdose. 3 of the 5 people charged in connection with his death have already pleaded guilty to federal charges. They include Perry's assistant, Iwamasa, who bought the ketamine and administered it despite a complete and total lack of any medical training. It's just mind-boggling. Eric Fleming, who admitted distributing the ketamine that killed Perry, and Dr. Mark Chavez, who says he sold the ketamine to another doctor. Two other defendants. The prosecution's main targets are Dr. Salvador Plasencia, who allegedly bought the ketamine from Chavez, and Jasmine Sanga, an alleged celebrity drug dealer dubbed the Ketamine Queen. Plasencia is out on a $100,000 bond, and Sanga is being held without bond. I want to bring in my pal, Jesse Weber. He's an attorney, a NewsNation legal contributor, and an anchor on the Law and Crime Network, and just a fashionista.
Wow, I got to be
Can I give you a hug?
You can.
Look who's
you're doing a great job.
Well,
you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Look who's interviewing who. Look who's interviewing.
I know how the tables have turned.
Exactly. All right, look. According to court documents, Perry's personal assistant says Perry asked him to shoot me up with a big one. I mean, Perry has been struggling with addiction for so many years, right? Does it really matter that Perry was asking for injections?
Okay, so a couple of things about that. Do we know that for sure? It came from Iwamasa, right? Okay, so we don't know that for sure. Now, here's the thing. I've been asked this question for the past 24 hours. What is Matthew Perry's role in it? Matthew Perry tragically suffered from addiction. The sad part about this is if he lived, and this was caught by investigators, he probably would have been charged as well. That doesn't negate what anybody else did here. And, you know, I've been hearing this a lot, that Iwamasa, his assistant, right, he knew that he was going to be fired. He was just doing what Matthew Perry ordered him to do. But at the same time, he's an adult. And it wasn't like he just dropped off drugs and walked away. He was getting instructions from one of the main defendants, the doctor, on how to inject Matthew Perry. Injected him multiple times in the day that he died. So even though Matthew Perry wanted this and directed this, this was a guy who was suffering. And I think that has to be accounted for.
Right. And he's also, well, we'll get to this. He's a trigger man, right, because he was administering the injections. But he's also the guy who knows everything and everyone. He's at the crux of this case. He's the prosecution's main witness. He's clearly flipped. I believe this is already out there.
Potentially 15 years in prison.
Right. And saving himself. You know, I do a lot of these cases in the same court, Central District of California, these death drug distribution cases. And, you know, it's a mandatory minimum of 20 years to life. Right. And so everyone flips, right? And that's how drug conspiracies work. You flip your way up to the top, to the main target. And so my question to you is, given the prosecutors work their way up, do you think that Sanga, what is it? The Ketamine Queen. By the way, I'm in LA, I'm in this drug world, and she's no El Chapo, okay? No one's ever heard of a Ketamine Queen.
They said she had this drug emporium of multiple vials, and she had all methamphetamine.
But my point is the DOJ is just like, they go with this salacious buzzword, and they've named her the ketamine. Anyway, do you think that now Sanga and Dr. Plasencia in this indictment, do you think they'll flip also?
You mean, do I think they're going to take deals?
Yeah, right.
I think there is
and cooperate.
I think that there is a strong incentive for them to do that when they're looking at potentially life in prison. And look, because the doctor, let's focus on Dr. Plasencia, soon to be maybe not doctor anymore.
Right.
Are there arguments?
A dealer in a lab.
Are there arguments that he can make? Sure. You know, I believe his defense attorney came out. Matthew Perry was struggling. He was taking ketamine. I didn't supply him the drugs that actually turned out to be fatal. They could say he had a legitimate medical reason. But when you read the text messages and they're using coded language, and there's this idea of he allegedly told another patient that Matthew Perry was spiraling. And that's just him.
Right.
It's much worse for the Ketamine Queen. They're walking themselves towards a conviction. It's going to be very hard. Now, of course, conspiracy, you could say there was no illegal agreement, but so much of it is documented.
Right.
I think their best effort right now, I think they have to really consider this, is can they work out a deal where they will maybe not spend the rest of their life in prison?
Right.
And can they connect law enforcement to other perpetrators
their
of a ketamine
sources?
ring?
There's always
Right.
another source.
Right.
And, these cases are always like, everyone's going like this. So now, like you said, Perry was spiraling, getting 6 to 8 injections a day, spending $50,000 a month on ketamine towards the end. Dr. Placencia, like you said, a doctor, surprisingly, emailed, I wonder how much this moron will pay, referring to Perry, right? Now, this is a doctor who's supposed to care for you, and instead he's preying on you, right? How do you think these text messages are going to play out?
I think we know how they're going to play out, right? It's not like he said, I'm going to prescribe you X, Y, and Z. Mr. Perry, I need you to take this. And then Matthew Perry abused that. This was getting the ketamine from backdoor channels and supplying. I'm sorry. I've never heard of a doctor injecting ketamine in a parked car. I've never heard instructing an assistant how to inject ketamine into his client, the person he works for. That's where it goes beyond here. And again, I think
outside
that's
of a controlled medical environment with life support, a life assisting equipment. Man, I'm so glad we had this conversation. I feel like we're going to have more of this on this case.
Look, it's a really sad case. I wish it didn't have to take such a high-profile death to shed what's happening here. But I will say, maybe, unfortunately, it takes something like this for there to be repercussions and for there to be some sort of change.
Yeah, no, the Central District of California is definitely, they do this to average Joes, with fentanyl a lot these days. But ketamine, fentanyl, they're all scheduled. Anyway, Jesse Weber, thank you, my friend, for spending your Friday night with me. Of course, where else were we going to go? It's fun, right?
Of course.
This is fun. All right, we have to take a very quick break, but please don't go anywhere. A recent rock and roll mystery has finally been solved. Remember all those headlines about how Elvis Presley's house, Graceland, was being sold out from under his family? Well, turns out the entire thing may have been a massive scam. Hey now, don't be cruel and change that channel. I'll tell you all about it next. "47 years ago today, Elvis Presley died. And we close tonight with some breaking news about Graceland, the King's iconic home in Memphis, Tennessee. You probably saw the headlines earlier this year that Graceland was about to be sold right out from under Elvis's heirs. Turns out there's a lot more to the story. According to court documents, a legal claim that had Presley's family all shook up may have been a scam by a devil in disguise who could soon be singing jailhouse rock. Lisa Janine Finley, also known as Lisa Holden, is accused of trying to stage a bogus foreclosure by claiming Elvis's late daughter, Lisa Marie, had mortgaged Graceland and failed to make the payments. A judge didn't buy it and refused to foreclose, and then someone claiming to represent the scammers emailed the media claiming the entire thing was cooked up by con artists in Nigeria, and that seemed like the end of it. But now, prosecutors say the scam was actually U.S.-based, and Finley was the ringleader. According to investigators, she created an investment company out of thin air by renting P.O. boxes, setting up dummy phones and fax numbers, and posting fake online reviews. Then, allegedly, she sent off emails to unsuspecting families like the Presleys. Finley was in court today and is in custody as we speak. To quote Elvis, "She's probably pretty lonesome tonight." That does it for us this week. I loved filling in for Ashleigh tonight. Cuomo starts next.
I call an opportunity economy. An opportunity economy. An economy where every